Hello and welcome to Spare Change News TV. My name is Sam Baltrusis. I'm the editor-in-chief of Spare Change News. Joining me today is Andrew Warburton.
Hello.
Hello. He is my right-hand man. We work on Spare Change News together. So tell me about, so you and I have worked together on many projects. So, we worked on books together, and then now we're working on Spare Change News. How has Spare Change News how has it been working for Spare Change News?
It's been fantastic. Basically every 2 weeks, I get to meet up with one of the vendors of the newspaper, the people who sell the paper. They're not. Some of them are homeless at the moment. Some of them are formerly homeless. Some of them, are just looking for extra money every week. So. I've always been interested in homelessness and helping the homeless, but it's just there's something about sitting with one of the vendors for like 20 minutes and just basically hearing their life story and hearing all the things that have happened to them, like difficult things or funny stories and anecdotes that they tell me. It's just kind of it's a privilege that I get to tell their stories in the newspaper.
What I think you do a great job at is you don't really focus on everyone's like, how do they become homeless? Like, you focus on their hopes and their dreams. Like, is it important the types of questions that you ask our vendors? Is it important to ask questions that are not really related on the bad stuff, but focusing on the positive?
Definitely. I mean, I definitely don't go into the interview just sort of with the main question, the forefront of my mind. What made you homeless? I like to get a bit about their childhood, so their relationship with their parents often has come out in the interviews. We have one vendor who grew up in Alabama during the 50s and 60s. He was sort of talking about how, for an African American woman, it was kind of a difficult time to raise 10 children. So I like to, get that kind of background, and then they're all so different. They all have such different stories to tell. So.
What are some of your views on homelessness before joining Spare Change News versus sort of now? And were there any stereotypes or thoughts?
Yeah, I've always been concerned about homelessness. I try and help out, giving stuff, whatever, but and then for a while I was working with the Franciscans for a while, so they're down on Arch Street, but I was working with the ones in Washington, D.C. And they sent us out with different organizations, so I got some first-hand contact with homeless people, but I felt like I was really just doing the jobs that they gave me, which were kind of menial things like cleaning stuff, whereas I feel like this getting to actually sit down with someone one-to-one and have listen to like you said, their hopes and dreams and their life story, it's just a bit more. I get much more of an insight into it, and I think it's become I think homelessness is way more real to me now from working with Spare Change News. I guess I was concerned about it before, but it's difficult to be concerned about something and to want to help, but you don't really have that contact, with the people experiencing it. So
I think for me, I thought that I was very, liberal and compassionate,
yeah.
But the thing is, I didn't really pay attention until the Long Island crisis, mm-hmm. And I got really emotionally invested in what happened, when the shelter closed on October 8th. And then I just I reached out, I'm like, what can I do? And then I became editor-in-chief of Spare Change News. And I'll tell you, the people that I work with at Spare Change News have become like my family.
Yeah.
And you and I, we go to the vendor meetings. So tell me about what your perception of going to the vendor meetings. We have vendor meetings every other Friday right before the issue comes out. So we have a sort of a one-on-one with all our vendors. We also have, Andy's able to actually do the interviews with the various vendors that we feature in the paper. And so tell me about sort of your perception of the vendor meetings and how, how that sort of has affected you.
Well, yeah, I love the vendor.
I do too.
I love the vendor meetings. Because I work nights and I'm an editor at night, so I basically spend all night, every night of the week almost, like staring at a computer screen and just being alone with editing. And I have people on Skype that I talk to. So it just makes it's really refreshing change to come to the vendor meeting and have all these people around me, and they're, you know, nice people and just interesting people who want to make a difference in the world, you know?
So the last vendor meeting, we had a group called COPE, which is the Communities Offering Practical Encouragement, and they brought shoes, like boots and scarves and what are known as blessing bags to some of our vendors. And this is after you left, and like we were all like hugging, and it was just, it was such a beautiful exchange of, you know, they felt like that the vendors, that they weren't invisible.
Yeah.
And like, the people that you talked to, did that ever come up, of the feeling of being sort of like not noticed, or they didn't have a voice?
Definitely, yeah. Two of them I can think of, you know, said those sorts of things. They both mentioned being passed by and in the street, and they try and talk to someone and people kind of ignoring them. So yeah, I do think it's important that somehow that gap has to be bridged between people who are homeless or disadvantaged, and then people who aren't, people like myself, I suppose, quite privileged people. That gap has to be bridged, and I think Spare Change News is doing everything it can to bridge that gap. I don't know, you know, what more it takes. I mean, people, unlike COPE, like you said, people like that are doing a lot of good work in the city.
So I'm showing John Denning. This is one of the features that Andrew Warburton wrote. And John is one of our younger vendors. He and I have kind of sort of developed a friendship since I became editor-in-chief of Spare Change News. And so tell me about interviewing. Your first interview was with Alja Benjamin, who is the longest-serving vendor, possibly, you know, in the country, maybe even in the world. And then you interviewed one of our younger vendors, John. You know, talk about like sort of the juxtaposition of having someone that's been with the paper for so long versus someone who's in their early 20s, dealing with homeless-related issues.
Well, I think that Alja is someone who's been through a lot. He's experienced homelessness, but I don't want to speak for him because, you know, I don't know everything about his story, but he does seem to have sort of come through that to some extent. I think he's fairly well established, though I'm not, like I said, I can't really speak for him. But John is homeless, right? Like, we were really concerned about him during the numerous blizzards because he's
unsheltered, so like he doesn't really have a home. So I think I agree with you. I think there's a difference between the unsheltered population versus someone who's been sort of knows the ropes. I mean, Alja is been with Spare Change News for many years, so he's sort of like the wise mentor to a lot of the younger vendors.
And that's what really struck me about my first interview with him, is that I came away and I just felt like, you know, like I was glowing because he had so much wisdom. And I do think it's true that, you know, when people have experienced difficult things and things like homelessness, they do have a wisdom about them that not everyone has. Whereas John, I guess, I don't know, he's sort of still in the midst of it, right?
I mean, he basically, he's supposed to be one of our guests tonight. But I'm about to, where there's a segment on Alja that sort of gives a voice to Alja, and you get to see for yourself this great man in action.
Well, it's tough. I mean, you spend long hours out here selling papers, you know, and right now it's cold outside, so, you know, that time is cut in half, you know, because, you know, it's kind of, you know, my age being 53, it's a little more torture on my body than it was when I was 20-something, you know?
I'm invisible. Now, I'm usually invisible. I was going to write a story about Invisible Man. Invisible homeless man.
Well, I use hand warmers and toe warmers, you know. I have to spend a few dollars to use them, to get them, but I don't mind that, you know, because, you know, I understand what my mission is. My mission is to support my family the best way I can. And the only way I can do that is be present, you know. If I'm not out here, then it's not like a job where you can take a day off and get sick pay. You know what I'm saying? If you're not here, you don't get paid. What I really got involved with Spare Change for was because I didn't want people to go through the same situations that I've been through. Because I know bouncing around from shelter to shelter with no money in your pocket, you know, it's no good, man, you know. And there's no jobs out there. No jobs if you're a homeless person. They don't hire homeless people. You must have an address, you know. I was homeless, living in a shelter, and the only means of support at that time for me was panhandling. And a Spare Change vendor approached me and told me how this paper could help me, and you know, the rest was pretty much history. When I started selling the paper, I sold, I think, 50 papers that day. You know, it made me feel good how people treated me when I sold these papers, how they talked to me. When you're panhandling, nobody stops and talks to you, you know. And, you know, it was a very depressing thing to do, panhandling, you know, for me. It kind of kept me in that negative state of mind, negative thinking. I didn't go to college. I didn't finish high school, although I got my GED. But, you know, it took me a number of years to do this. I started having children at a young age. You know, I got a divorce at a young age. I got depressed, and I went into this whole thing of drugs and alcohol and stuff. Even though I was using and drinking, I was still a functional alcoholic. You know, my children saw me. You know, when they needed something, they got it, you know. But I don't want to be that no more, you know. My head is completely clear. I have a destination where I want to be in life. You know, I'm just working to get to that destination right now.
The nice thing about Alger is that he does like to talk, and like he said, the people in the street say that says he sometimes feels like a street psychologist.
Yeah.
And you really get that from him. Like I feel like I could talk to him. And when we went to Dunkin' Donuts and had coffee, which is another nice thing, rather than, although the vendor meeting is great, it's kind of nice to go out for coffee as well.
Yeah.
But he really liked to talk, and it went on for way longer than I expected. Because originally the vendor profiles were supposed to be like one-word answers, right?
Right, that was our original intention, but then they kind of molded into something else. So.
And that's because of Alger.
Yeah.
Because it was, you gave me these questions to ask, and it was going to be like one-word answers. It was going to be on the back so that people could read it quickly, right? So if they're just like on the T and they buy a Spare Change, they could just like flick through the answers.
Right.
But because Al just said so much and like had so much interesting stuff to say, I think it turned into like basically an article, right?
Well, I think what I got from the clip, from his story, is a lot of people think that homeless people are drug addicts or alcoholics, and I'm finding that a lot of people, that's not true at all. That's a stereotype, and I'm very, he talked about it clearly in the documentary about his struggles with drinking, but he was a functional alcoholic. Does that come up a lot, like sort of people that you're dealing with who are in recovery and that are still homeless, but they're sober?
Yeah, I mean the three people I've interviewed have all had histories with some form of substance. But I think it's different with, you never really know. I'm not an expert on homelessness. I'd have to ask someone who was, but like you never really know. It's like in this kind of cold temperature, would someone want to use alcohol or drugs because it's so cold? Or I saw someone up the road here in Central Square who was just like falling around drunk, and I was in the Dunkin' Donuts, and there were some other guys in there who I wondered if they were homeless, and they were in there to get warm, and they were talking about him, saying that he's going to freeze the amount of alcohol he's drunk. But so you never really know. Is it is it addiction, or I don't know? Well,
that's a good point. Our cover story from last week, and was Unsheltered Dangers, and so you actually talked about sort of the dangers that face the unsheltered communities And one of the issues is drinking and drugs. And if they are incapacitated, they're not able to realize that they have hypothermia.
Yeah.
So it's a huge issue with the unsheltered homeless population. From my perspective, I feel like that there's a small percentage where that's an issue. But I was blown away by how every day, that these people are, like, that their struggles are just like my struggles, and that these are people that a lot of them are sober, a lot of them, there's a small percentage that aren't sober, but I think that the percentages are way lower than I expected. I thought that everyone was going to be, and there's like that one person that you see at a Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts that's drunk, and there's 9 who are homeless for various reasons. They lost their job. They had a divorce. They're removing themselves from sort of a violent situation. There's like so many different stories in every. So I think that from my perspective, the stereotypes that I may have had coming in are not true. They're unfounded, and I think that I view it as like they could be my brother. Like John, we talked about John, the young vendor. He could be my brother. And when I approach him, I think of him as family, and I view Alja as family. Mm-hmm. I grew up in the Panhandle of Florida, and I had friends. Alja's just like one of my friends growing up. So I view these people as family.
It's funny because you started out saying by asking me how it had changed my life, but I feel like it's changed your life.
It really has changed my life. I think that like with John, I'll tell you the truth. The truth is I care about these people so much, and when it's snowing and I know that they're out there, I don't know what's going to happen to them.
The day of the blizzard, when you told me that John had spent the night out in the blizzard, and I don't know. I just can't imagine what that would be like to be outside in that kind of temperature. And
so it's important for me not to get emotionally entangled, because I think I have a job to do, and my job is to tell their story. Mm-hmm. And so speaking of that, we have a sneak peek of our upcoming edition. Our next issue is on the census, and this is our cover. The story is written by Alex Ramirez, who was our guest last week. He wrote another cover story, and as you can see there, it says, "I am not just a number." So I feel it's really important to give a voice to the community, and I feel like you're doing a fantastic job doing that.
Thank you for the opportunity to write about this stuff, because it's just so amazing to tell these people's story. It really is, because it's just very fulfilling to do that,
Well, just kind of, Andy and we're best friends. So we've done a lot of stuff together, and we go to the vendor meetings, and we have breakfast after, and we talk about it, and it's sort of it's amazing. We've worked Scout magazines. I was editor at Scout Cambridge and Scout Somerville, and we worked together there. It's amazing to be a journalist and to do work that positively affects the community. So I have worked all over. I worked in New York. I worked for Newsweek. I worked for a stringer for the New York Times. But the work that I'm doing for Spirit Change News is important, and I feel like that I'm positively affecting the community, and I think that it's needed. I think that stories related to giving a voice to the homeless population is extremely important. So I want to talk. We have breaking news. We found out there is a homeless gentleman in Los Angeles who goes by the name of Africa. He was gunned down by the LAPD yesterday, and this is controversial in the sense that he was just a homeless gentleman, and he was, I guess there was a ruckus involving the tent that he was staying, because he was staying in sort of the tent city of Los Angeles, and he was gunned down. Now the video that's online I'm not going to show it because it's very violent, but the fact is our homeless population are being criminalized, and they are, in some cases, in the case of Africa, are being killed. So it's important that we view these people like Alja, like John. They have a name, and they're people and they're human beings. So it's important for us to embrace our brothers and our sisters, and it's important to give them a name and to give them a voice. So we're getting close to the end of the show. So what are some of the, what are you working on now, and do you plan on doing any maybe more stories related to the various profiles? One thing I would like to see you do is profile more women.
Yeah.
Now, tell our audience why we rarely feature women in our publication.
Well, basically because they don't want to be. So we've tried. They don't want to be interviewed, do they? They don't want to appear in the newspaper.
Let me tell you the truth.
So I mean, it's good. Yeah, we understand the reason. I'm not saying
the truth is that they don't feel safe, and so the females that are homeless have a lot of issues related to safety issues. There's violence issues. Some of them have PTSD. I am a strong believer in not only giving a voice to our male vendors, but also to our female vendors as well, because a lot of these women were victims of domestic violence, and some of them have had really destructive past and are avoiding these situations, so they don't want to be in the paper.
The other thing that I've been thinking about this a little bit, and as a writer, I kind of listen to like Joe or Alja, and I hear, oh my God, this is great material, and it's like I want to write about it, not just because I've connected with them as a person, I've connected with them beforehand, but at the same time, I feel like just because someone has a story to tell and you're a writer doesn't mean you have a right to tell that story. So I feel like you have to respect people's desire for privacy, and do you know what I mean? So I kind of understand why, say, some of the female vendors, they don't want their picture on the back of the newspaper. They don't want their story in the paper. It's like, I feel like it's important to sort of respect that. And the people I've interviewed so far, they've really been very willing to have everything out there. So we're really lucky that they've wanted to do that.
And just to let you know, like what's happening is, for example, with Alja, with his story, it was a hit. People love knowing about his backstory, and he was like, Alja, you got to autograph the back of the paper, because he was like selling the paper left and right. And just to let you know, like the people, our vendors, one of the things I've heard, because I talk to our vendors on the streets, and I've heard people say, get a job. They have a job. Their job is to sell spare change news, and they're probably the hardest working people I know. So it's an honor for me to be the editor-in-chief of Spare Change News, and to work with these people who are working, and they're working hard. They're out in the freezing cold selling the paper, and I feel like that we're doing. We're facilitators, so we're telling their story.
Definitely.
And hopefully, I want more Alja.
I would like more women to be willing to to come to and tell their story. That would be awesome.
And I'm not going to reveal any names, but our cover again, we can't say who it is, but is a female. So I'm slowly working in. Our next issue is the women's issue. So we're going to focus on strong women, women who fight for sort of like women and children. So it's going to be more geared toward our female vendors, and also sort of. I feel like women are forgotten in the shelter system. If you look at Woods Mullen, for example, there's only one floor, and that's supposed to be a women's only facility at some point, but right now it's not. And there's Southampton Shelter, which is a brand new shelter, but it's men's only. So where do the women go? So it's important for me to give a voice to the women.
Yeah.
So we're getting close to the very end. We are definitely looking for more vendors. So if you have a friend who doesn't have a home, looking for a job, we are looking for more vendors, and we're also looking for celebrity vendors. So if you know Tom Brady, or if you know someone that's a Politico, or if you know Giselle, we're looking for a vendor. So thank you very much, and Andy, thank you
very
for
much.
joining us on Spare Change News TV.